My friends, look at the geopolitical board I'm about to lay out before you now. The sepulchral and terrified silence that echoes today in the corridors of the Palácio do Planalto in Brasilia. It is exactly the direct consequence of the deafening noise and the weighty decisions being made right now in Washington. We are witnessing the end of an era of illusions while the government of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva locks itself in offices to draft official documents. Desperate, confessing the irrational fear of an American military invasion, the real diplomacy, the kind that shapes the world, has changed hands. Senator Flavio Bolsonaro is physically on American soil, participating in decisive public hearings where he intends to ask the United States to postpone the brutal additional tariffs on Brazilian goods. He is sitting at the adults' negotiating table where Brazil's future is actually being decided. And this is very serious and exposes the backbone of a government in panic. For you to understand the depth of this abyss, we need to plant a clear metaphor in your mind. The current Brazilian government is using the classic tactic of the drowning man's embrace. Lula is sinking in his own diplomatic isolation and in his shady alliances, and he is desperately trying to pull the entire country down to the bottom of the ocean with him, using the flimsy excuse of defending national sovereignty. Lula wants to sell his base and the press that protects him the artificial narrative that Flavio Bolsonaro went to the United States to sell out Brazil and hand the country over to the Yankees. But the plain, harsh and cold reality is that Flavio went to do exactly the job that Lula's government refused to do: negotiate. Because over the past year and a half, Lula tried to use the old stalling tactic from the São Paulo Forum with Donald Trump. But American patience ran out. The United States government got tired of playing the smoke and mirrors game of the São Paulo Forum, closed its doors to Brazil's foreign ministry, and found a new legitimate interlocutor. The US State Department is no longer listening to those who coddle dictatorships. It's listening to those who actually want to fight organized crime and unlock the economy. And just look at the level of disgrace in the eyes of the diplomatic world. Reality has two very clear and distinct paths in this scenario of hysteria. The first path is real fear, the terror of seeing your most important asset being completely dismantled. We're talking about the blind protection of the party machinery, the controlled voting blocks, the territorial control of the masses in the outskirts, and the billion-dollar campaign financing scheme. These are structures and schemes that Western intelligence has already proven to be closely interconnected. The American government, in a lethal way, has just shown the world the direct connection between major criminal factions, like the First Capital Command, the PCC, and the Red Command, with central figures in the system, even mentioning the links with the bald guy from INSS. The power structure in Brazil has umbilical ties to narco-terrorism, and that's the cord Washington is about to cut. Now, the second way this governmental hysteria manifests is the childish attempt to raise a false barrier of cheap nationalism. The government tries to label Trump as an enemy of Brazil, deliberately claiming that the United States plans to invade or militarily attack Brazilian territory. In the minds of Lula's marketing strategists, creating the specter of a Yankee invasion would generate an immediate popular reaction of unity around the president, taking advantage of that segment of the electorate that harbors chronic and blind anti-Americanism. But this is nothing more than a guerrilla marketing tactic based on a monumental lie. The United States has no intention of invading any territory. Washington's goal is to eradicate narco-terrorism from the continent, and the question that crushes the government's argument is simple. What is the real problem in accepting cooperation and cutting-edge intelligence to fight and prevent narco-terrorists from factions if the Brazilian state itself has failed miserably and couldn't handle it alone? Paraguay accepted the help and did it. Millei's Argentina did it. El Salvador under Bukele did its historical homework. The formidable shield of the Americas was created precisely for this: to organize the continent, close the borders, and kick out the corrosive interests of the big cartels and their illicit dealings. The ones they maintain with Communist China and Putin's Russia. The Americans are not invading Brazil, they are cornering criminals. Now, if the President of the Republic by any chance already knows behind the scenes that he or his people are on the lists of criminals and sanctioned individuals, then it would be a historic and civilizational favor that the Americans would be doing for the Brazilian people. The documentary proof of this fear is named Mauro Vieira. Now I'm going to give you the documentary proof of this fear, which is named Mauro Vieira. Before that, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave your like on the video, because it takes a lot of work to make. Our community keeps growing here on YouTube. In an official letter from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent on July 1st in response to questions from the Chamber of Deputies, the Chancellor admitted the possibility of military action and the use of force by the United States in Brazil due to the recent and devastating classification of Comando Vermelho and PCC as transnational terrorist organizations. And the one who cornered the government was Federal Deputy Iver Vieira de Mello from the Republicanos Party in Espírito Santo. He presented 5 lethal questions to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He demanded that Brazil's foreign ministry inform whether evaluations were carried out on the diplomatic, economic, and reputational impacts of this classification, if there was communication with the Chief of Staff's office, and the final blow, whether the American classification would produce extraterritorial effects on Brazilian financial and immigration institutions. And in its response, the government revealed its own desperation. The document from Itamaraty states that the measure could impact national sovereignty and that the designation as terrorists would not bring concrete benefits for coordination between the two countries. What a colossal lie that was. We have already had joint operations by the federal police, extraditions and arrests that were tremendously successful in crippling the PCC and Comando Vermelho. But the part where the government's document really gives itself away is when Itamaraty complains that these actions by the United States have a broad degree of discretion due to the scope of the discussion, the American legislation against terrorism. They are terrified because the United States can unilaterally put any financial or political arm of these factions on the dreaded OFAC list. This means the immediate freezing of accounts, a total ban on transacting in dollars with the Western banking system, and severe financial, immigration-related, and criminal implications. In other words, anyone who is a partner, lawyer, or financier of Comando Vermelho or PCC will no longer have anywhere to hide their money. Itamaraty calls the hunt for criminals an attack on sovereignty because it can no longer negotiate the protection of its own allies. It's like a drowning man clinging to someone at a public beach. Now, if you want to clearly understand what's happening in the real world, a country that has definitively lost its trusted interlocutor with the United States of America breaks its shield and chooses to lock itself in a dark basement. With the dictatorships and with organized crime, just look at the Caribbean Sea today. Right at this very moment, the warning coming from Havana is the future that Brasilia is trying to flirt with. In the last few hours, the Ministry of Energy of the Cuban dictatorship was forced to admit that the national power grid has suffered a complete, catastrophic, and total collapse. Do you understand? The entire communist island was left in absolute darkness. The power went out and chaos reigned. A few hours later, President Miguel Diaz-Canel went on X, formerly Twitter, to cowardly accuse the United States of trying to provoke a social explosion through strangulation and suffocation. The Cuban Minister of Energy, Vicente de la Olari, announced that emergency microsystems were being activated only for essential life or death services. But the truth is that this is already the worst and most destructive structural crisis to hit the island since March, completely destroying education, the transportation of basic supplies, the infrastructure for medicines for the population, and wiping out any cent left from foreign tourism. The old Communist Guard responded with their usual victimhood. The Cuban Minister of Foreign Trade and Investment, Oscar Perez Oliva Praga, went on CNN on a global network to complain and lament, accusing the severe sanctions imposed by Washington of being collective punishment and calling the American pressure genocide. The Cuban dictatorship tried to send out what the United States Department of State mockingly called smoke signals, modest, superficial, and long-awaited, approving loose pseudo-economic reforms in its National Assembly just to try to deceive investors. The American government did not back down an inch. Washington's message is brutal. Open up your political system, the Marxist, dictatorial, dark, and hermetic one, or the country will return to the Stone Age. The fuel that kept the old generators running no longer comes in since the sanctions cut off the supply from countries that were still trying to provide oil to the Caribbean island. But the hole in this story is infinitely deeper, more secret, and more dangerous. What the mainstream media hides is what happens in the shadows. In recent weeks, the American siege in Cuba has reached the highest level of military and intelligence tension. In May, none other than the powerful CIA director John Ratcliffe secretly landed in Havana for extremely tense face-to-face meetings with the top leaders of the Cuban spy agency. Simultaneously, as a show of relentless force, the commander of the United States Southern Command, SOUTHCOM, brought his fleet close and sat at the table with high-ranking military officers of the dictatorship in the fortified surroundings of the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base. The United States of America demanded final explanations, leaving no room for cynicism about the irrefutable fact that Cuban territory is hosting and protecting complex secret Russian and Chinese military listening and espionage stations, operating right under Florida's nose to try to frustrate and sabotage American communications and interests in the region. The shield of the Americas has been activated. Washington will not, no matter how much diplomatic flexibility is shown, tolerate Chinese Axis espionage bases or operational narco-terrorism platforms installed and active in its own backyard. And this is exactly where destinies cross. The agony of darkness on the island of Cuba is the message, the warning, and the omen. If Cuba is the model of disaster, Brazil, governed by Lula's alliances, is the central target of the total siege underway on the South American continent. The era of official cynicism has ended brutally. The Trump administration got tired of playing Lula's deceitful chess game. If the outcome of the public hearing in the United States and the final executive decision in the Oval Office are favorable to the economic shielding negotiations proposed by Senator Flavio Bolsonaro, the humiliation will be on the world stage. Itamaraty, led by the submissive Mauro Vieira, will effectively cease to exist as an influential and credible entity for the free Western world. It will turn into a useless bureaucratic office, and this proves beyond a shadow of a doubt the perverse logic of the Planalto Palace. The nationalism that Lula preaches into the microphones is a sham. It's the pathological pride of someone who, deep down, prefers to see their country hit with excessive tariffs by foreign markets, impoverished, suffering from inflation, and geopolitically isolated from the Western world, sinking toward darkness and the blackout model of Havana. Rather than admitting and enduring the humiliation of seeing the right-wing opposition crossing borders and bringing real billion-dollar pragmatic solutions that the federal government will never be able to deliver. Because it is up to its neck, morally and structurally, entangled with the dark underbelly of power. The fear of the PT government regarding interventions by the United States has no basis in the reality of free nations. If we look at the continent with a cold, objective eye, Mexico, governed by an ideological leftist president who has historically not aligned with Trump's Republican axis, accepts and carries out week after week billion-dollar joint tactical operations by the DEA and American security forces operating inside Mexican territory in absolute coordination with the local police to take down and extradite cartel leaders. Ecuador, under a right-wing government, when it saw its nation held hostage by armed terrorism in the streets, immediately opened its doors and struck targeted military agreements with Washington to wipe out the criminals. Pay attention here. The United States doesn't need to and won't drop bombs from B-2 bombers on Christ the Redeemer. They don't operate like that in allied democracies. The cooperation is surgical and based on financial intelligence. The only variable, the only exception in which the United States uses its coercive supremacy and operational force in a suffocating way. It's exactly when the state in question has already become so corrupt that it openly refuses to cooperate with the free world. Because its own mechanisms of government have already been co-opted, bought, and inseparably merged with the transnational organized crime system. It was with this precise moral and criminal justification that Donald Trump authorized the relentless international manhunt operation against the dictator Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, after intelligence proved that the leadership of the Bolivarian government was the leadership of the Cartel de los Soles. That is what Iran represents and what Cuba embodies today. The uncontrolled nervousness and the shaky official statements from Itamaraty reveal the panic of a history that Brazil is trying to bury. The disastrous history of Brazilian alliances weighs heavily in this chess game. There is a deep, bloody, and real historical origin documented in archives. The Comando Vermelho itself was born not by chance in the late turbulent 1970s in the stone cells of Ilha Grande, from the close interaction and exchange of ideologies between dangerous common criminals linked to drug trafficking and guerrillas and political prisoners from the far left of that time. That seed that was planted formed the feared Falange Vermelha, which structured urban guerrilla tactics in Brazil and evolved into what the Comando Vermelho is today. The intelligence community in Washington doesn't have a short memory. They read files, and Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira is terrified of the extraterritorial implications of OFAC and the Treasury Department. They dig so deep that they prove the umbilical cord connecting white-collar elites to the rifles of the dead. Now we're going to reach the threshold of implosion. The Brazilian government, hostage to a stale continental power project that has collapsed, knows that the game of appearances has run its course. The diplomatic vacuum created by the ideological arrogance of the Planalto Palace was quickly filled by those who understand the cold and direct language of Washington. The Brazilian state apparatus is wetting its pants because it knows, deep down in its guts, right at its core, that if the White House and the Shield of the Americas decide to pull their institutional triggers and arrest the financial and logistical elite of the international criminals that the state itself harbors or turns a blind eye to in order not to lose its electoral stronghold, there will be no spin from Globo, no political strategist, and no false narrative of offended sovereignty that can save them from handcuffs and complete isolation. The web of illusions has been torn in half. Now come here, come here, come here, as a military intelligence exercise and a stance for the determined minds. For our top-tier audience, I invite you to go down now to our comment section to write down the 2 keywords that prove you have deciphered this dossier. I challenge you to type as clearly as possible Shield of the Americas or the power vacuum. Show the smokescreen that exists in Brazil, a community that knows exactly where the fire that's going to burn down this hypocrisy comes from. I repeat, Shield of the Americas or the power vacuum. My friends, the disturbing question that is now arising on the continent is no longer if the United States of America will actually act in a lethal and definitive way against the immense network of narco-terrorism that is parasitizing Brazil and Latin America. The siege has already begun. The vital question that will define your own freedom and your future in the new order is just one. On which side of the table and in which trench will you be sitting when the lights of the ministries in Brasilia start to flicker desperately and go out in the dark? Exactly like the cold and lonely lights that are dying today in Havana? Think about it and answer here. Now, my friends, the undeniable lesson we draw from this geopolitical coldness is clear. Whoever loses the ability to connect with reality is taking big steps toward ruin. And bringing this logic to your business, the rule of survival is exactly the same. Today, the silent war you fight on the internet isn't about having the best product. It's for the scarcest and most valuable currency in the modern world, people's attention. Have you noticed how hard it is to get the audience to absorb deep and serious content? Yes, my friends. The false feeling that social media gives us is that only shallow memes or flashy dances go viral. That's a lie. I completely understand your pain. 15 years ago, when I started out in the tough trenches of radio and commercial television, I used to think that way, but I came to understand an undeniable truth. The real mechanism for generating magnetic authority isn't luck. It purely depends on the fusion between substantial content and a solid strategy. Many entrepreneurs want recognition, but they haven't understood that the game now is 100% about media. And I've already understood this by generating over 50 million views every month here online and monetizing in dollars, which are worth 5 times more. Take the example of Simed. To triple its sales in an incredible way, this giant understood that it needed to operate aggressively like a media company, a pharmaceutical company. Yes, look at the Havan stores. The old man from Havan put himself out there on the internet and you say he just wanted to show off? No. He controlled the narrative around his own story and keeps opening store after store, recording profits even in the midst of chaos. Now, he's also opening his companies over there in Paraguay. Yeah, my friends, that's the reality in iCrew. The identity of your company can never be outsourced. The business owner needs to put themselves out there and set the vision for the market. Is the romantic era of recording with your phone in the dark, with no authority and still making money over? Today, this space is brutal and demands elite professionalism. So if you want to gain unquestionable authority and showcase your work in a serious way, I created a hands-on intensive to guide you in this process. You need to make the algorithm work for you. That's what allows you to charge more, have higher margins, and reach premium clients that were previously out of reach. On July 12th, pay attention, I will hold this intensive 100% in person, face-to-face with me here in my studio in Curitiba with my professional team. It will be an intensely practical meeting where I will personally guide you so your business can show up professionally with a killer method. But I'll be straight with you. We only have 10 seats available. When the 10th spot is taken, the steel-reinforced door will close immediately and the opportunity will be gone. Remember July 12th, so this is the last week for you to make your decision. I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. You just don't know how to put this into practice. You don't know how to execute it. So the QR code is on the screen now. Scan the QR code with your phone or use the secure link in the description and in the first pinned comment to go to our page. Secure your spot. Write "I want" in the comments and we'll send you the link. It's time for you to step out of the shadows and go to the front lines of your business, of your company. And look at what we've created for you who's tired of spending an hour on Netflix or Amazon just to find a good movie or series. We created our channel with recommendations for series and movies with a complete and impeccable curation. No woke culture, no whining, with amazing titles for you to just sit back and watch, enjoying your time with your family. It's terrible to spend hours searching for something and in the end it's total garbage. I put an end to that problem. Now on our series and movies channel, link in the description, in the pinned comment, and in the card that appears on your screen. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave your like on the video because it takes a lot of work to make. Shield your mind, I'm Shimon Oliveira, and I'll see you in the next video. See you there.